What happens when an Australian butcher starts a comedic YouTube channel about Leviticus? In this episode, we talked to Phil Bray, who started reading Leviticus as a butcher and thinking he saw things that other people were missing. He started working out a lot of that material on his YouTube channel, where he does lots of funny bits and short reels. And then eventually he realized he had a lot of material that would make a great book. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about how he sees butchering, slaughtering, and the act of atonement in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and why he thinks Leviticus is fun.
This is the Biblical Mind Podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
It started with atonement. It started with a statement. So I was in a men's group. It was called Beers and Bibles, and we'd meet on a Monday night just in a mate's living room. We'd bring a can of beer and just chat about the Bible. It was a little bit for people who were wandering away from church, but would be happy to drink a beer and chat about the Bible.
Right.
So I found myself there. Not that I was wandering away from church, but there I found myself. And someone just said some throwaway comment about Jesus on the cross, which I had assumed was true. I assumed was the gospel. But the kind of long story or the history is that I'd been listening to a lot of Bible Project and N.T. Wright, and they'd kind of given me the freedom and the license, maybe the ownership, to go back and read the Bible for myself, just kind of outside of maybe the tradition I'd grew up in. So I went home and tried to find that throwaway line in the Bible, and I couldn't find it. And then weeks later, I was still looking for that idea in the Bible, and I thought maybe it's like the Trinity, where it's this doctrine that's not explicitly stated, but it's there. And the deeper I dug, the more I found that it wasn't there at all. And then at some point, I found myself in Leviticus, and I'm still not sure why, but Leviticus made sense. And it was kind of a way to chat about atonement without getting into the really nasty, angry debates about atonement. Because I found that maybe it's because of my butchering background that I understood that part of Leviticus, but I found and understanding ancient sacrifice really helped with the atonement debate. Yeah.
You might be the only person in history who said, so I went to Leviticus and that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I'm still not sure exactly why, but there's something about Leviticus.
Well, so I was working on a book on ritual years ago, and obviously Leviticus came up in that book because it's got a little bit of ritual in it. But I resorted to just like stick figure drawing out every single thing I was reading. And that's when I came across the stark realization that, there's not enough information here to actually do these rituals, to perform these rituals. And then I read some people who confirmed that that's actually not a wild view, but that it rides on a wave of already previous knowledge of rituals, how rituals work. And you seem to have some of that previous knowledge. So you're a butcher and you're in Australia. So is it lamb? Is that what you spend a lot of time? Lamb and cow? Is that what you butcher mainly?
Yeah.
And pig, I guess.
Yeah. So we'll get lambs, 5 lambs on a hook. And when I was working in a big butcher shop, we'd get maybe 100 lambs delivered at once. And yeah. And you'd spend...
Alive or dead?
Dead. Yeah.
Okay.
Without the head.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you'd spend the morning kind of breaking up lambs. So you take the forequarter off, take the legs off, and then straight down the middle of the saddle and divide it up into its cutlets and loins and the chump, we call it. I'm not sure what you call the chump chops.
I don't know to what that refers. So I don't know lamb cuts either. So it wouldn't help. Yeah.
I ended up in a more of a supermarket. So while I used to break up beef when I was an apprentice, in the supermarket, the beef comes like vacuum packed. So we're more just slicing steaks.
That's
of the beef.
convenient.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in the military, I was on a deserted island. There's like 20 of us on it that was owned by Hondurans. It was a great deployment. But the guy who owned the cows on the island came out on a boat one day and said, "Hey, if you help me slaughter some cows, I'll take you out on my boat." So we did, and we butchered one of the cows. And put the legs up on a forklift and lifted it up all the way up. We had a little dirt runway there, so we had some equipment. And the overwhelming sensation that I had at participating in that, to the little bit they let me participate, is this is a ton of work. And this is before I was a Christian. And then I remember when I got into Leviticus, thinking like, oh, I thought the priesthood was like this spiritual job, but now I think more of it like, this is blue collar. This is mainly blue collar work, right? Is this issue of butchering and helping and accepting butchering parts? Sorry, that was a long aside to say, when you look at an animal and you think of it as its constituent parts, how does that help you understand Leviticus versus me, who I didn't ever hunt or anything like that. So that was my only experience. Hunting cows was literally my only experience hunting.
Yeah.
But I assume you just see things differently than I do in Leviticus. So what is it that you see that the average person doesn't?
Yeah, you're right. It is hard work. And they're really heavy.
Yes, all dead bodies are heavy. That's one thing I learned in the military.
Yeah. And a forklift would be a great tool to lift up a dead cow or a bull or an ox. Like when they get delivered, they're in 4 quarters, and most of the drivers who deliver the meat will carry in 1 at a time. The really strong guys might carry 2, but there's no one carrying 4 quarters or like a whole cow. Right. But the thing that actually made the connection for me, I was reading Mary Douglas about the kidneys in the middle of the animal, and she kind of has this idea that the kidneys are in the center, and that represents the most holy place, and they're surrounded by a layer of fat, and that might be the curtain around the kidneys. Because God gets the fat and the kidneys, and no one else is allowed to eat those parts, which corresponds to the most holy place. But as she was talking about that, I thought, the kidneys are in the middle, and they are surrounded by this thick layer of pure white fat, because that was my job as an apprentice, was to pull out all the kidneys. And they are in the very center. But if you look at it on a picture, they're not really in the center. But when they sit on the butcher's block, they are quite obviously in the center of the animal. And I think that clicked, and I was like, that's something that I would know that maybe no one else who's studying Leviticus would know. So that gave me the idea to write the book. But yeah, there's a few things like that, like the livers being really heavy. I'm like, they're surprisingly heavy, having handled lots of livers. Compared to kidneys, they're quite heavy. And compared to meat, the liver's a really dense organ. And that's actually what it means in Hebrew. It means like heavy or weighty, which is fascinating. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to connect some dots here, because I remember reading that in Mary Douglas, and lots of things in Mary Douglas where I'm like, yeah, right. Because she does sometimes, I love Mary Douglas and I love her work, but she does sometimes, in my opinion, seem to overread things, or she tries to systematize a little bit more beyond what I'm comfortable with. But I've never butchered a lamb, so what do I know, right? So was that for you just a point of interest, or you think like that cemented that what she's saying is the right interpretation?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure that it is the right interpretation, but it more made me think that that it's more than just killing an animal. It's kind of there's something more going on. So even though kidneys represent like their deep inner emotions and the livers represent kind of weighty emotion, I don't know that that's what they thought when they placed that on the altar. But it would have been like in their cultural river, maybe, as John Walton would say.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think that that was the symbol. Like maybe if we took out a heart from an animal and placed it on the dinner plate, we wouldn't be thinking, oh, someone loves me, because a heart is a symbol of love. But
it's a really good analogy.
Yeah. But, if maybe you sat with it for a while, that idea might come up. There might be some connection. But yeah, I think she's maybe stretching it a little bit too far, but it's something in the Jewish style of meditation. It's something fascinating to think about.
Yeah. No, I find her work very energizing. It gets you thinking in lots of different. And one of her points is that there's spatial reasoning going on in the thinking of the text, and that if we're not understanding that, we're missing some of the elements, which I think she's right about.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you can help. Maybe you're going to totally blow up my idea here, but I have been saying for years, based on very little evidence and experience of my own, that that most people that handled and butchered animals in the ancient world all the way up into the present, that they wouldn't have seen the actual killing of the animal as a violent event. That wouldn't be equated to like murder. And because I honestly, in the classroom, that's the first thing that people come up. Why are we murdering all these animals? I'm like, I don't know if that's the conceptual world of butchering, is murdering. Do you think of it as a violent event?
No, in a word.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think because we're so removed from the way our food is prepared, we are kind of horrified. Like we eat a burger every day, maybe. Well, maybe not every day. It's not healthy, but
some people do.
If you eat meat,
Americans certainly do.
Yeah. But like something had to die for that burger to exist, for the burger in your hand to be a thing. There was a death involved, but we don't associate eating a burger with death. And I think it's the same jump that we're making if we associate sacrifice immediately and primarily with a death. That to prepare a meal and to prepare a feast of meat, there has to be a death. But that you will read scholars, and it's not hard to find, which is unfortunate, who say that the act of sacrifice was supposed to be painful and violent, and it's supposed to teach the Israelite that's what, like, I included in the book some quotes where a couple of scholars say the slaughter was signifying a violent and painful death, and that's what the offerer deserved. Well, that was teaching the Israelite that that's the death that they deserved, which is, maybe we can talk about that later, but it's really harmful if you just had your period, or you've just been to your parents' funeral or touched a dead body, and now someone's telling you that you deserve a painful death because you're unclean. Like that's pretty harmful, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you can certainly imagine how Christian preachers could easily get, that'll preach, as they say, very easily.
But all that to say that the death, we don't know for sure, but we can assume that compared to other nations, the Hebrew way of slaughtering an animal was as painless as possible. If you're going to slaughter an animal, the way to do it is the way that we imagine the Hebrew priests and people did. It was painless. An animal couldn't be blemished, so it couldn't be bruised or beaten or have a broken bone. Can I tell my story about so when I was an apprentice butcher, we visited a abattoir or a slaughterhouse, and it just so happened that day was the Jewish slaughter day. Is it a shochet? Do you know the name for the man who does the kosher slaughtering?
I don't know any Judaism.
Yeah, don't know. So, and that was rare. Like, I don't know how often they did it, but normally there's a gun that shoots a bolt into the head of the animal, and that kind of immediately stuns them. But the modern and current way of slaughtering an animal, of Jewish slaughtering an animal, is with a really, really, really sharp knife. And so between each slaughter, he would run his fingernail along the blade of the knife, like literally between each time that he cut the throat. And he was testing for a little imperfection in the blade. And yeah,
Whoa.
your eyes are the right reaction, because it's a super sharp knife.
Yeah.
And so if he found a little imperfection or a nick in the blade of the knife, he'd take out his sharpening stone and sharpen it back to a perfect edge, and then he'd test it again. And if he was happy with it, then he could continue. And it's two reasons. So one is that the slaughter was supposed to be as quick and painless as possible, and a little nick in the knife might be enough to cause, more harm than needed. But also, if the blade was impure, it meant that the animal was also now blemished, not unblemished, and so it wouldn't be considered a kosher animal anymore. So that's not in the Bible, but that's how the Jewish kind of thinking has evolved. That even the act of slaughter has to be an unblemished process.
I would call that a faithful improvisation on what the Torah teaches, right? It's trying to extend the thinking into even the kind of knife you use, even how often you sharpen it, right?
Yep. Well, the Torah doesn't even tell us to use a knife.
No, yeah, exactly. Well, it does on one ritual. On circumcision, you're to use a stone knife rather than which is really fascinating because they had metal knives, but God's like, no, you're to use a flint knife. Be circumcised.
That. Yeah, okay.
Which, if you've ever seen old, you can find them in some, like the Louvre or the British Museum or those Metropolitan. They usually have a section where they have some flint knives, like Egyptian flint knives or something. And it's mildly terrifying if you think about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was very effective because they can be very sharp, but terrifying to look at, I guess. Yeah, and I think what you say about the issue of the kind of those bad reasoning around a sacrifice, that it's something has to die in your place, it just doesn't square with what Leviticus teaches either. Like, okay, well, I can bring a grain offering in certain circumstances, oil and grain, but nobody thinks of a sacrifice. This is Christian Eberhard makes a great point on this, and Catherine McClyman, that, the word sacrifice, we equate it to the death of an animal, but it's not actually equated to the death of an animal. Lots of things count as a sacrifice. Both Cain and Abel's offerings were sacrifices, even though they're called mechad. So nobody thinks of the grain sacrifice as a violent sacrifice as well.
Yeah, and there's no instruction there's no instruction to pound the grain or to grind the grain into a fine powder. If they wanted to communicate violence or destruction, they could do that.
No, that's a great point. And I think it led me to another idea that what you just said, and it's gone. Okay. That's how it goes with my brain these days. Okay. So as a butcher, you're looking at animals and you're reading Leviticus, but, if we're just honest, Leviticus, only the first few chapters are the ones where you really talk about butchering animals. You started this YouTube channel called Leviticus is Fun. That's the name of it, correct?
Yep.
Which is a pretty hilarious YouTube channel. So I don't even go there for the Leviticus content. I only go there for the jokes. So, but I imagine some people in your life, as you describe this, they think maybe you've lost it a little bit, or kind of a little bit kooky. Like, would you tell the average Australian on the street, like, oh, I run a YouTube channel, it's called Leviticus is Fun, and expect them to understand what you're talking about?
No, I've come up. I normally tell people that it's about ancient sacrifice. And then I kind of
Oh, that sounds sexy.
I gauged their reaction from that about whether I mentioned Leviticus.
That's smart.
And how quickly I jumped to the Bible. Yeah. And depending, most people, which is weird, most people go straight to like human sacrifice. They're like, oh, so, have you talked about human sacrifice? And like, well, no, I haven't.
Not supposed to happen.
Yeah. So I started the YouTube channel basically because I was writing a book. And like
this book here, Leviticus on the Butcher's Block.
Yeah, that one. And I don't have any letters after my name. So I don't have a doctorate or a PhD or anything. So I'm kind of a nobody who is a butcher who's obsessed with Leviticus. So I
don't worry, there are a ton of people with PhD after their names that are nobodies as well. We are legion.
Yep. So the YouTube channel was just a way to kind of basically test the waters, see what people were kind of excited about, and work out how to communicate really nerdy Leviticus ideas to people, and and get my name out there as well.
Yeah. I mean, you say you're nobody, and I can see that especially if you're looking at books and, people like John Walton, who writes, God love John, but he's putting out The Lost World of whatever every other week. So there's a lot of intimidating flow of information there. But for me, it's slightly more exciting when lay people who don't have professional education, get into the text and figure it out on their own. And then, we're all reading other people to help us think through things. But to me, that's the exciting thing about the Hebrew Bible, is that you, a butcher without the letters after your name, figured out stuff that I couldn't figure out. I've certainly read this book and learned some new things that I had never thought about before my entire life. And I've written a few books in and around Leviticus, right? So that's the beauty of the whole system. So for you, why did you want to get this into a book out there into the world? Why not just teach Leviticus for the next 10 years at Sunday school in your church?
So, I'd always wanted to write. I think when I was at school, that was my dream, was to write, but I wanted to write fantasy books. I wanted to write about
what kind of fantasy?
Like castles and goblins and elves.
I hate that stuff, but I'm glad there's people who enjoy that.
That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to write about the Bible. But when I was nerding out on Leviticus and sacrifice and atonement, my job at the moment, I do a lot of driving, and so I was listening to lots of audiobooks and lectures and podcasts, and kind of as I drive, I dictate notes into my phone. So at one point, I added up all the words in a word count, and I had like 20,000 words of notes. And then like a couple of months later, I had 40,000 words, and I thought, maybe I should turn this into something like a book or something. And I kind of did, but it was too big and sprawling and terrible. But then when the butcher idea came along, I thought, I've kind of already got all the information. Let's just make that into a more concise, butcher-focused book. It was two things that I enjoyed. Like I wanted to write, but then when Leviticus was the thing that I was passionate about or nerding out about. So I just combined the two, basically.
I assume in Australia, as it is in the United States, that when people talk about the book they like the least in the Bible, Leviticus is right up there with Numbers. The twin towers of unlikability.
Yep.
And the channel's called Leviticus is Fun. So what is the most fun about Leviticus for you? Like, which part do you get giddy at?
To be honest, it's just helped me make sense of the stuff that never made sense before. So I had assumed that the animal was slaughtered on the altar without thinking too deeply about it. You don't have to think even that much about it before you realize that that's impossible because the altar's on fire.
Right.
And
you thought it was actually like the work was done on the altar.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha.
And bulls are really heavy. You're not going to get a bull up steps onto an altar. And they're going to resist when they see that someone's trying to put them into the flames. So,
right.
But things like that, I think just because I just assumed that what I'd been taught was right about atonement, and everyone's so obsessed with death and killing and pain, and Leviticus was just it sounds weird to say, but maybe a breath of fresh air to understand it as a ritual that had meaning apart from it's all about death. And so one of the surprising things for me is that I've really come to love the idea of liturgy and ritual and the meaning that's not stated or isn't kind of explicit in the words, but as you experience something, it can teach you something that words can't communicate. So I don't know about your tradition or your church, but where I am in Sydney, a Sydney Anglican, it's very cognitive. So the focus is on the preached word. It's all about kind of a cognitive affirmation of, understanding the text. And even to the point of, like they might not want pictures in church. They wouldn't want anything that might distract from the sermon, which is the main thing, or the most that we actually say the most important thing that we do is read the Bible, and it's kind of implicit that they mean preach on the Bible.
Right.
So yeah, it was surprising that I came away from a couple of years in Leviticus really appreciating the smells and the sights and the sounds and the tastes, and all of that would have communicated to something that, a cognitive sermon couldn't communicate. And the Lord's Supper as well has become something that's super special.
Let's talk about the smells for a little bit. Okay. I'm just going to admit it. I don't like frankincense. I don't like the incense they use in the Smells and Bells churches. And by saying I don't like it, I mean in the same sense that, some people who eat cilantro, or what do you guys call cilantro in Australia? Coriander?
Coriander, yep.
Yeah, coriander. So you use the British. Okay, so coriander, cilantro. Some people, it tastes like soap to them. I don't know if you know this. That's how frankincense is. It gives me a headache. I don't like the smell of it. But when I think about Leviticus, there is a very olfactory world going on there, right? It is a lot of smells. So what are the kinds of things that we're going to be smelling if we're, your workaday priest working in the outer courts?
Yeah, so the incense definitely. And the incense was a special recipe, I think.
Right.
So it's not something that you would have smelt at home or in the marketplace. It would have. So smell is a really strong trigger. Like whenever I smell a certain kind of wood burning, it takes me straight back to a scout camp that I went on, which is my first couple of nights away from home, and I got really homesick. But it's still a positive smell because it was a camp in the bush, and we shot arrows at things, and it was great. But that smell takes me back 30 something years, immediately.
Right.
So to have that one incense smell that would associate you with that space that you wouldn't smell anywhere else, that's a powerful reminder.
I will note that it was outside. Well, until the temple, then I guess they move it inside. But
yeah.
The smell would disperse.
Yes,
not linger.
That's right. Yep. But definitely roasting meat. So you would have smelt roasting meat on a fire. You would have seen the smoke ascending. So there's a lot of things that would have combined to communicate something that, there's food, definitely.
Mm.
The smoke from the food is going upwards that you would see, even if you'd say brought an offering, a couple of hours ago, and you're now sitting at your tent, you can still probably see the smoke ascending into the heavens. You probably get wafts of the smell, and so you might imagine that that's the sacrifice I brought a couple of hours ago. You might even be eating it with your family at home now, and you would know that the priest has some of that meat, might be eating the meat, that the smoke from your offering is ascending into the heavens, and the priest has said that your sacrifice was accepted, so that you know that God has accepted the sacrifice as well. And then you might even be tasting the meat with your family at home. So it all kind of communicates that the offering that you brought was accepted, that it was a pleasing aroma to God, and then all your other senses are involved as well, just to reinforce that fact.
Yeah, I always think, actually, it was a Brazilian friend of mine that pointed out the fatty portions go to Yahweh, and the fatty portions is where the real good-smelling smoke comes from.
Yeah.
Than the lean portions. Have you ever seen a live animal sacrifice in person?
Not
like the sacrifice, not just a butchering. Yeah.
Yeah. So not sacrificed. We visited Ethiopia a few years ago before children, when we could travel.
BC.
Yeah. And so we were taken there by a coffee company because I had a connection to coffee, and we visited a coffee farm that the people who did the tour were buying coffee from this farm, and so that he was kind of their source of income, and they were really, really proud to have us there, and they slaughtered an ox for us. Yeah, which would have been, thinking back now, at the time it wasn't, I mean, it was still amazing that they would slaughter an animal for us. But thinking back now, the 5 and 6 year olds that we saw there, they'd never seen a white person, but they'd also never tasted meat, which was amazing. So to get to 6 years old and have never eaten meat, it was a pretty special and rare thing for them. So they didn't cook it, which made me a little bit worried that I was eating raw meat. So they kind of yeah. So they slaughtered the ox, they hung it up, and then they were just kind of cutting strips off it. And as a butcher, it was a really bad way of cutting the meat up, but you do what you can with the instruments that you've got. And so they were literally just hacking at this meat and just tearing strips off. And we were sitting around a fire, but they were just eating raw meat. And I thought, here I am in the middle of rural Ethiopia. I hope I don't get sick. But I knew you couldn't get any fresher than that. So I just went with it. And
that is pretty fresh.
Yeah. So they didn't sacrifice it to any gods that I know of, but they were still honoring their guests with something that, a 5-year-old had never seen before, which is pretty cool.
Well, and I think that's the conclusion I came to, that I think you tie together nicely in the book, is that sacrifice is often is associated with food more than anything else. It's food for God, food for us. And that, and like you said, Wesley Bergen has this great little article where he talks about Westerners who eat meat at a level unimaginable by ancient people, and yet recoil at the idea of the death of an animal in a sacrifice. Because we've completely divorced those two things from each other. And my cute way of saying it is, that in America, the meat is packaged so as to suggest that no animals were harmed in the production of the meat, kind of a thing.
Yep.
And I think what you do very nicely, just by the nature of your occupation in the book, is you bring together the idea of food and sacrifice, which seems to me to be as strong of an image in the Atonement as anything else. So you mentioned the Atonement a couple times. What's like, what's your hot take, or maybe it's a slow take on the atonement now after having spent years going through Leviticus?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that Leviticus helps to show is that it's not primarily about the death or the slaughter, that sacrifice. And so what you said earlier, that you can't complete the ritual just from reading the text of Leviticus. Like there are bits, like for example, it's not instructed that you use a knife. So there's bits that you would just have to know from the ancient context of how to do sacrifice. So that, what was I saying?
The issue of atonement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The meaning of what you're doing wasn't focused on the death. And I think that helped me rethink atonement, where I'd assumed that atonement was all about death. But the slaughter isn't primarily about, the sacrifice isn't primarily about the slaughter. It actually doesn't become a sacrifice until something's placed on the altar. So if you just killed an animal, it's not a sacrifice yet. Even if a priest kills an animal, it's not a sacrifice. It becomes a sacrifice when it's, in a sense, dedicated to God and made holy. But part of that process of it becoming holy is the contact with the altar, which Jesus says. He says it's the altar that makes the offering holy. So, and it's because it's likened to God's table. The altar is the altar and God's table are kind of synonymous language. So primarily what a sacrifice is a gift given to God. And it's the best gift that you can lay your hands on, whether it's an animal or grain or something else. But the other thing is that it's normally food. And that's something that we just don't really, I hadn't noticed, even though it's really, really obvious. But
it is really obvious when you step back.
Yeah.
But
everything that's offered to God is like oil or wine or even salt or grain, like cakes made from olive oil and flour or meat. It's all food. There's a couple of times when they talk about gold and silver as an offering, but that's like once. it's kind of rare. And that, I think that was for the dedication or the building of the tabernacle.
Right, exactly.
But the idea is a gift given to God that becomes something holy that is acceptable to God precisely because it's a holy gift.
And so when you look forward to the sacrifice language about Jesus, I think Christian Eberhard is the one, I think it's he who makes the point that in the Gospels and even in Paul, the discussion of Jesus as a sacrifice is not really focused on his death. It's focused on that he was acceptable, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and and so that's something that still comes up a lot now. You can find verses that appear to be saying that Jesus, or they say that Jesus is a sacrifice, but when you look closely, it never says that. It never likens the cross or the crucifixion to a sacrifice. It will say things like, live a life like Jesus did, who offered himself. Or, walk in, is it Ephesians 5:2? Walk in love just as Christ loved us and offered himself as a sweet-smelling aroma. So it's the life that Jesus lived and the selfless offering of himself that's acceptable, not the murderous, torturous death that he experienced. There
is something. It's funny. This issue came up. I was talking to a friend who's in India, and he was talking about I had him talking to my class, and he's in an area of India where it's not even Hindu. They're like primitive religion. It's a very interesting area that he lives in. But one of the students said, well, like, are the Christians there who are there? They're being heavily persecuted. he goes, are they Orthodox? Like, do they believe in the Apostles' Creed? And this is like one of the most enlightening things I've ever heard in the last couple of years. He goes, yeah. We do the Apostles' Creed, but it goes, who was born of a virgin, suffered and died under Pontius Pilate. And he goes, in 2 sentences, they covered his entire life, all the stuff that he did. And he goes, for my people, we're really interested. Like that, all that stuff he did when he was alive was actually just as important. And we just kind of consider it historical facts of the miraculous life of Jesus. And he's like, no. The fact that he came and touched people, that he went to the persecuted, that like the way he lived his life is the most important thing we can think about with Jesus. Where go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I find it strange for myself, or paradoxical, that I've been studying sacrifice and slaughter, but one of the things that it's highlighted for me is that it's more about the life than the death. So, yeah, what you were saying, like, I just did a video on the incarnation because last year I heard a Christmas Day sermon that was about Jesus' death, and I got frustrated. But as the more I understand sacrifice, the more I understand that it's the life of the animal and the condition of the life of the animal that makes it acceptable and unblemished. And then when you think about Jesus, what makes his offering acceptable and unblemished is his life. And, that's the majority of the Gospels.
Yeah, fascinating. I wonder, just physically speaking, as a butcher, when you get an animal and you're kind of looking at the insides or whatever, you're looking at it from, this kind of forensic view. Can you tell the difference between the life, like if an animal lived a rough life or not?
Yes, you can. So, well, apart from the fact that the animals that we have are quite fatty and well fed, compared to,
as they're supposed to be.
Yeah. Compared to an animal that might live out in the wilderness and be eating like dry tufts of grass, they'd be, kind of a scrawny animal. If you get a bit of meat that is, you can tell if it's been bruised, and it looks disgusting and feels disgusting, and it's not something that you would serve. So we don't, it doesn't go on the shelf. But you can tell if an animal was stressed as well. So it has a weird texture, and the color is also weird. So if an animal was stressed when it was slaughtered, it releases a hormone that the stress hormone, and that stays in the animal, and it's not something that looks attractive, and it's not something that tastes attractive. So all of that, as a butcher, like, I know that I wouldn't serve that to anyone, but as an ancient person offering a sacrifice to your God, you wouldn't offer it to your God either. You would want the animal to be, calm and, not stressed and not bruised. So all of those things, like, won't be bruised, won't be beaten. All of the things that stop the sacrifice being, blameless and acceptable.
Can you tell just by looking at the animal whether it was a heavy drinker or smoker? Just asking for a friend.
Yeah. No, I think that one's safe.
Okay. Well, you know how I always tell students, because I have a bunch of undergrads. I'm like, oh yeah, you go to that 10th high school reunion, and you can tell who's been drinking and smoking pretty heavy for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's like all of a sudden things you could hide when you were younger come out. Yeah, I mean, even that, what you're saying, the idea of stressing an animal, the thought had occurred to me that if you're tending to animals in ancient Israel, that you have to be when you're looking at your flock, you have to be thinking over time, like, well, which ones am I going to take up to the tabernacle or the temple? And then a very practical problem, which maybe you might have some insight on, if you just take one lamb and you walk it, a week to the temple, there is a chance that it could break a leg. Something could happen to it, right? It's the hill country. So I always thought maybe they're having to drive a few animals if they're taking them from there. If they're driving animals, of course, there is a provision where they can buy animals locally as well. But yeah, it would be a risky move, I would think, just to take one animal to the temple.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But definitely the instruction is to select from the flock. So I think that's
Right.
a kind of mindful, which one am I going to choose? And that, I think, is where the fattened calf idea comes from. The fattened animal is one that you would keep aside and maybe feed extra food, and this is the special one. So it might be used for in the parable of the what is it? The parable of the son
the
prodigal son.
Yeah.
The fattened calf is slaughtered. So that's planned. They've kept that one aside, planned for a special occasion. And I imagine that normally it would be offered as a sacrifice, and then they would bring the rest of the animal back for the celebration.
Right.
Maybe not, maybe not every time, but that, at least in ancient Hebrew thought, that's how it worked.
So there's a ton of stuff in Leviticus before I let you go that's not about butchering or sacrifice. So how do you think about, I mean, there's, I always think of a Hebrew's life. When they look around, they see grids of things that you can and can't do.
Like a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Just, less of a list of rules and more just, and I think we always find it very weird and taxing. And then I start thinking like, well, there are certain things that I wouldn't touch because I would consider them unclean, even though they look completely fine from the start. I always joke that, cause I rarely get sick because we're probably the same age, Gen Xers. And I say, when I lived in New York City and I came out of the subway, I would lick both hands, just to keep myself healthy. But yeah, there is this kind of world that's set like a matrix of go, no-go areas, as Mary Douglas has said, clean and profane. How do you see the book of Leviticus as a whole? Like, if you were to say, okay, what's the thumbnail of what Leviticus is doing? What do you think it's doing as a whole text?
This is partly from Tim Mackey, probably, but as I've read Leviticus for myself, the big idea, I think, is drawing near to God. So how can a people, the focus is from God's perspective, I think, that God wants to live in the midst of his people. It's not so much a people who are eager to hang out with God, because often they weren't. But
that becomes the problem.
Yeah. But God wants to live in the midst of his people, and his people are to draw near to him. But there's problems with how that's going to happen outside of the garden. So yeah, I think all of the things are showing that God wants to live with his people, but for the people to be able to come and meet with him or visit him, draw near to him, they need to demonstrate that they're in an appropriate state. So one of the things I say in the book, and this is one of the things that I've kind of concluded, that we see it as a restriction, that you can't draw near to God unless you're holy, or you can't draw near to God in your sin. And in a sense, that's true. But I think what Leviticus, or what God's teaching through Leviticus and those purity laws, is that everyone in my presence will be clean. So it's more a demonstration of, in my presence, there will be no death. In my presence, there is no disease. It's not like if you've just touched a dead body, or if you have a disease, you can't come and visit me. It's more, when you are in my presence, this is what it looks like to live with me in my presence. Like, there will be no disease, no death, no impurity, no more sickness. I think that's what the image is communicating.
So God's presence itself is like a taste of the eschaton, as they say, of what things will eventually be like.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I always accuse a lot of my friends in scholarship, especially of the New Testament variety, of reading too much into the temple and the sacrifices, of basically thinking that these were like the end all be all. And I always say, well, I mean, it's not like God wanted to have this whole, dog and pony show. Not that any dogs or ponies were sacrificed, but it's not like he was like, oh, it'd be great as if, we had this huge system where we mediated my presence to all of you. But it is a way that he can be amongst Israel. But it also, as you said, it's a great way to put it, is that he wants to be amongst Israel. And that's the goal. And, you could think of, if I'm reading you right, then this kind of, for lack of a better word, even though I hate it, like a ceremonial side, like this physical ritual embodied, how do we navigate in the world physically as a people, and how do we approach God, is paired together with the section of Leviticus. It's always surprising to people, like Leviticus 18, 19, 20, 21, where it's like, and you can't exploit people, and you can't steal from people, and you can't, you can't judge people unrighteously. So there's this kind of like the ethical, moral side that makes the sacrifice worthy of God as well, of his presence. So yeah, that fits together very nicely. Okay, the book we've been talking about is called Leviticus on the Butcher's Block. Sorry, I didn't even know there was a subtitle to this. I just now noticed this, Making Head or Tail of the Bible's Toughest Book. Oh, that's really clever.
There you go. More dad puns.
Yeah. Well, I should tell people that this book is are there even any other books in the world that do what you're doing? I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure there's something else out there, but this is a short, how many pages is this? This is only 100 pages long, a very simple, engaging, and punny book with illustrations all the way throughout. You have, did somebody did the
my wife,
right?
Yep.
So, your wife did?
Yeah. Okay. So, like I was saying before, how a lot of people just preach cognitive sermons. And I wanted the book to be, to demonstrate how it's more of an experience and that uses all of your senses. And someone said, well, you're writing a book that's just words. I was like, oh, you're right. Okay. I'll put some pictures in there. So my wife did all the illustrations.
The illustrations help. You should have done scratch and sniff too. You remember those pictures?
Yeah.
But this is actually a book you can hand somebody who just can't get their head around Leviticus, where they will actually be able to not only understand large sections of it, but like realize why it's such a profitable piece of instruction for God's people. So, Phil, besides Leviticus is fun on YouTube, anywhere else they should look for you out on the world?
That'd be the main thing. Leviticus is fun on YouTube. The book,
where you make humorous yet seriously engaging content on Leviticus and other things, Torah. Thank you, Phil, for your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.